be participating.
Is she speaking at all?
Good evening. I call to order the virtual study session of the Lakewood City Council on November 18th at 7:02 p.m. To connect with the council meeting online, you can use one of the following links, either lakewoodspeaks.org or lakewood.org/council videos. For online public comments, we do have those available also on Lakewood Speaks. You may post comments of any length to lakewoodspeaks.org, an online forum for public comments that will be left on overnight and until tomorrow morning through 10 a.m. tomorrow morning. For any comments that are related to, we have two topics with tonight's presentations. I will, with that, go ahead and hand it over to our Assistant City Clerk, Ms. Fiore, if you could start us off by calling the roll.
Strom,
Here.
Cruz,
Here.
LeBure,
Here.
Lowe,
Here.
Mayor Guerrero,
Here.
Nystrom,
Here.
Olver,
Here.
Ryan,
Here.
Sharazai,
Here.
Spinks,
Here.
and Stewart is absent. Mayor, you have a quorum.
Okay, thank you so much. So we'll open up the conversation for tonight's first topic. That's on our extreme weather sheltering. And council has asked for staff to give us an update on the work that's being done in this place. And with that, this evening, we have Chris Connor here, who is the manager of our Housing and Thriving Communities. And he will be giving us a presentation on our city's the status of the city's extreme weather sheltering program. For those of you that have watched for a while, you'll know that this is ongoing and new-ish kind of work for our city. So we're very excited to hear a little bit more about where things are, especially as we're heading into the 2025 planning season, to understand where things are, maybe where things have been, and give us a little bit of an idea as we're trying to move forward on what kind of ideas, what things we might like to be looking at as we look ahead. So with that, Mr. Connor, I'll go ahead and hand you the floor and we'll give it to you to take it over.
All right, thank you, Mayor Strom, and thank you, Council, for having me tonight. It is, incidentally, it's the very beginning end of National Hunger and Homelessness Awareness Week, so it's appropriate time to be giving this type of presentation to you all. I'm going to go ahead, share my screen, and get us underway. So a little bit about how I organized this presentation. I made this slide around these 4 themes. They'll continue to resonate throughout the presentation, but really I took a kind of a who, what, when, where, why, how kind of approach to organizing things. So we'll go ahead, and what you'll learn about tonight is a little bit about our division, Housing and Thriving Communities, a little bit about the context in which we do this work this season, this time of year, about where we do the work, the city's navigation center, and about a little bit about how the program functions. So it's a programmatic based presentation to give you an idea on the steps that we take to activate and stand down our program. So a little bit about Housing and Thriving Communities. This is my first opportunity to really publicly introduce the division. So we're a division within the Department of Sustainability and Community Development that's delivering the second presentation tonight as well. The division was created after the establishment of Lakewood's very first strategic housing plan in February of 2024. The work that we talk about tonight bears upon elements of that plan as well. And we really operate in three categories. We implement the strategies within that plan. We implement initiatives in the neighborhood support team functions. So this is your neighborhood participation program, neighborhood get-togethers, and the like. And then we administer the city investments in homelessness response, housing, and community-based programs. So that's just a little bit about where we're coming from because we're new. Wanted to make sure we got that introduction in. But starting off, severe shelter, why do we do this work? So there isn't really a lot, surprisingly, there's not a lot of peer-reviewed research on the correlations between homelessness and cold weather injury or cold weather morbidity. But two recent studies kind of do stand out, one from Toronto and one that preceded it based in New York City. The kind of upshot or the highlight of these two studies really is that it indicates that risks come and are relevant even when temperatures are not sub-zero. So we tend to make people present in mind in homelessness when we're seeing those temperatures go down into the single digits, go down below zero. But really, it doesn't take much for injury to meet people who are enduring life outdoors. So in Toronto, the odds of experiencing hypothermic injury or death increased more than 1.5 times. For every 9 degrees, it dropped from 32 degrees Fahrenheit. These aren't round numbers because I put a lot of effort in this slide because it came from Canada, so I had to move a lot of Celsius to Fahrenheit. So that's why it's not around 10 degrees drop, but every 9 degrees it goes down from 32 degrees. 1.5 times more likely to suffer a hypothermic injury or death in Toronto. With precipitation, it's even less. So if you have a millimeter of precipitation out there, your risk for hypothermia increases more than 1-fold, 1.1-fold for every millimeter of precipitation. So if you're getting wet and it's cold, the risks increase. So 72% of the events in Toronto that met emergency rooms or people succumbed to the cold were actually when lows were warmer than 5 degrees. So again, it's not when we're necessarily seeing those minus 10 degree temperatures that factor in, but it's often above that zero mark and even more. And additionally, a lot of the incidents that present to emergency departments, even though they're smaller in percentage of the total incident, we can move over to the New York City side of this. Their emergency department, 1% of visits for hypothermia are among people in homelessness, but still that goes to 24% of them of their hospitalizations for hypothermia are of people experiencing homelessness. So what this tells us is other folks, those 99% who may present for emergency room visits for hypothermia, aren't necessarily moving into the hospital for longer stays and the expenses that are incurred with those longer stays, but they're maybe treated in the ER and then sent home, while as people in homelessness are not. Additionally, even with that slim number of emergency department visits, 18% of deaths in hypothermia in New York City were among people experiencing homelessness. So those are national studies and national insights. We don't have studies per se that are localized data, but we can parse out information data based on homeless emergency room visits combined with visits that are related to hypothermia and homelessness, and then data on hypothermic morbidity of Jefferson County residents regardless of housing status. So I'll walk us through a little bit of that here. So the main thing, this is a chart that looks at monthly homeless-related emergency department and urgent care visits among Jefferson County residents. So this isn't necessarily people who visited a hospital in Jefferson County. They may live in Jefferson County, report that they're residents of Jefferson County, and have have accessed emergency care somewhere else for hypothermia. So this is a significant kind of nuance, one that we can't fully tease out in a data-informed way. But this, for instance, might include scenarios that somebody went winter camping or went for a ski weekend or something, and were in elevation and such and experienced hypothermia there. They may go to the health system in Summit County, but reporting that they're from Lakewood, from Golden, or from a municipality, they would still show up in this data. Still, some things that we can pull out of this chart is the increase, the general increase on homelessness-related emergency department or urgent care visits. So I guess I might be a little bit ahead of myself on the skiing example. We don't have many people in homelessness who are going up to the county, up to Summit County to ski. But note on this chart, if you were to split this chart in that middle, so if you were to look at January of 2022 here and draw a line up here, so no month in 2019, 2020, or 2021 did 100 people in homelessness or more present to the emergency room or urgent care visits in Jefferson County. If you look at that climb since January of 2022 to the most recent data in September 2024, when I put this presentation together, there were 20 months of more than 100 people in homelessness presenting to the emergency department or urgent care. The average number of monthly visits for that period on that second half, more recent side of the chart, was actually 112 compared to 65 from the left side of that chart that has the older data. So we understand that more people in homelessness are accessing emergency department or urgent care in Jeffco. So what about those related to hypothermia, those visits to ED or urgent care? So 2021 and 2022, I don't have as far back data, but they delivered an average of 1.6 visits per month to the emergency department or urgent care for hypothermia by people experiencing homelessness. So the total number in 2021 and 2022 of visits was 38. Between January of 2023 and again, the most recent data, September of 2024, the monthly average grew to 2 people experiencing homelessness presenting to emergency department or urgent care for hypothermia. So that number also climbs with 46 total visits to emergency rooms. This is the final chart that I have of local data. This is all thanks to Jeffco Public Health, by the way. But this is one of the more striking ones to me. So again, this is referring to Jefferson County resident hypothermic deaths. So this isn't necessarily where people succumbed to hypothermia or a cause of hypothermia in their death, but that they were Jeffco residents between 1999 and 2023. So this data goes back pretty far. The last 5 years have presented the highest number of hypothermic related deaths to Jefferson County residents for that entire period. So if we look over the 20 years between 1999 and going up to 2018, Jefferson County averaged 2 hypothermic related deaths each year. But in the last 5 years of tracking in Jefferson County, the average has been 7.4. So we have more Jefferson County residents who are passing away due to hypothermic causes or hypothermic related causes in the last 5 years than any time in the 20 years preceding that. All of this, it's a little bit speculative to kind of think about in terms of homelessness, but at the same time, in the appeal of common sense, we know that people who are staying outdoors are at higher risk and higher threat to the elements. Now, contrary to this, a little bit is when the Jefferson County coroner looked in the last year's data, they did not identify any deaths from weather-related or hypothermic causes among people who are experiencing homelessness. So there's a couple things that are going on here. One, that earlier chart, that's where that factor of it measuring the deaths of people who reported residency in Jefferson County, but not necessarily the location of their death. The coroner only investigates and looks at deaths that are geographically occurring within Jefferson County. So that's one way to look at it. Another way to look at it is in 2023, we were activating, we were providing life-saving shelter through BAYOD, through Recovery Works, through our homeless navigators, and helping people navigate their way to care. So this work may matter in that sense as well. So moving on, that's a little bit about why we do this. It's a life-saving effort to bring people indoors, but want to move on from the why, which we always start with the why, to the where. Lakewood's Navigation Center. So the Navigation Center comprises this lawn building with the dark roof, as well as this smaller square that is a tan roof. So it makes that opposite L shape. It does not include this white roof section. The building is contiguous. You can navigate through both on the inside. They're not separate buildings by entrance or anything. They have a common entrance. The building is located at 8000 West Colfax, and we purchased it just a couple of months ago. It came into possession of City of Lakewood in September of 2024 in partnership with grant funding from Colorado Department of Local Affairs. That said, prior to our owning of it, it was leased and operated by Recovery Works as a navigation center for residents experiencing homelessness since October of 2023. So Recovery Works is now the City of Lakewood's tenant. Prior to that transfer of ownership, they were still a tenant of the building and operating in the same capacity during the day to provide services to people experiencing homelessness. So part of that service was last cold weather season. The building also hosted severe weather sheltering. It's going to be utilized for that purpose again this year. But its long-term vision will be to renovate and redesign and renovate a longer-term use as a improved ongoing care center, navigation center for people experiencing homelessness. A couple things happened once that building came into our possession. Most importantly is it allowed us access of the entirety of the building for severe weather sheltering. So last year, even though we mobilized the same address location, we were really limited in the space that we could use in that building because it also housed a active business in the rear hall. This video is from last year, just to give a feel for the kind of operations that have been happening there. Allow myself to drink a swallow of tea here. I'm sorry, it sounds like that went by. I could hear the audio on my side, but it sounds like it didn't track to the presentation to you all. Apologies for that, but hopefully you could walk through the captions on that and capture the video. So this year, since we're able to utilize more of the space, more of the potential of the Navigation Center, we are able to increase the number of souls that we're going to be sleeping on severe weather activation nights. So last year, we allowed ourselves to go up to 50 souls slept each night of activation, and this year we're moving that up to 75. So it's a 50% increase beyond what we were doing last year. So getting to the rest on the who, what, when, where, and how, not only are we increasing the number of people that will be sleeping overnight, but we're increasing the number of anticipated nights of activation as well by adjusting the weather criteria upon which we would open the shelter. So the activation criteria falls into either of the weather conditions of overnight low temperatures being 32 degrees Fahrenheit or below, with active and accumulating snowfall and precipitation. Typically, that's going to be read as meeting that 1-inch level of accumulation, and it would be active precipitation, not just snow that may be residual on the ground from a previous snowfall. Or if overnight low temperatures are forecast to be at 20 degrees or below, we would release that precipitation requirement, and that would be with or without accumulating snowfall or precipitation. We would start an activation. Our activations are invoked through emergency declaration that allows us to navigate some of the challenges of the facility and to be a bit nimble about standing up shelter. So, apologies, this is the source of truth for weather forecasts is going to be the National Weather Service's 72-hour forecast for Lakewood. So what that comes up from is this little green box. There's a weather station somewhere in there. It comprises of Belmar, the downtown areas, and that draws all the weather information upon which we base our decision, and is available at the link in the presentation there. It's 72 hours because we need to give our providers, since this is not a night-to-night shelter, the staffing patterns are invoked alongside the weather activations. So we try to give our operating partners that 72-hour period to get their staffing plans in order. The National Weather Service has also developed a predictive tool that helps us kind of look at a map and anticipate what the weather conditions are going to be across a 7-day period. So this is a screenshot of one of those maps from the site. You can see the municipalities here and a percentage factor in there. So this would be the potential for temperatures to go beneath 32 degrees. The tool also allows you to do that at gradients of temperature. So we can produce another map that would show us the likelihood that overnight low would be 20 degrees or under. And then that allows us to be informed as we go and we look at the 72-hour forecast in particular. The link to that is also available if you want to follow up. Where we go from there is we look at a hourly forecast from National Weather Service that will place the low temperatures vis-a-vis the snowfall, anticipated snowfall, so that we can look at that information in one place. So what happens? So the next set of slides are kind of the time marks that go through an activation all the way to stand down. So this is T minus 72 hours before an activation. So we've looked at the maps, we've looked at the weather, we know that in 3 days we're going to activate. There's 4 main components that we will invoke once we know that we're making that decision in 3 days. One, we're notifying those operating partners for that 72-hour period so that they can start getting their staffing patterns in order, start making calls and assigning shifts and supplying up for sheltering. We send out our homeless navigators. I have 2 of them, right? So we send out homeless navigators with the priority to connect with their known contacts on the street to make a plan for how they're going to access shelter, or to track them to alternative shelter if they need accommodating service in that way, and can't navigate the congregate shelter too well. We coordinate with our operational partners in the region. So here in particular, we're talking about the county. So we're getting our county partners in line to know that we're going to activate shelter on this date. So can you also arrive with alternative shelter means, motel vouchering, your outreach and messaging as well, so that we can accommodate everybody who comes to us. And then we monitor the forecast for those stand down conditions. So a good example of this is we will be activating tomorrow night for likely a 1 night period. And we made that decision going into the weekend and started these functions accordingly as we were making that decision. So within 1 day or 12 hours before we're activated, we're still doing some of those functions beforehand. We're still deployed, we're still coordinating with our partners, and we're still watching the weather to anticipate a stand down or any change in the weather. Important in this phase for you all is that our public pushes and our public notifications tend to go out in this 24 to 12 hour action period. There's times when we'll move those further up the clock and notify earlier if we're going into a weekend or such. But important to know that we need to know that our staffing is on lock. We need to know that things are coordinated. So we're not, aside from our homeless navigators, we're not doing external messaging or external pushes until we absolutely know that, typically within a 24-hour period. So the primary, original, accurate, and updated public information that leads that public push of information is always through Lakewood communications at lakewood.org/shelter. So that's going to be the first and the authoritative notification that goes out externally that we are activated in the next day or sometimes longer if we can get that information out. It's really imperative that we follow the lead of Lakewood Communications and all public communications on activation, aside from the homeless navigators that are meeting people one-on-one. Follow that posting and follow Lakewood Communications lead. The reason for that is the information can get really sticky and mistranslated sometimes. And so if we're working within a 72-hour period, me telling somebody that the shelter is going to open in 3 days can oftentimes, by the time it meets somebody in need on the street, sound as the shelter is opening tonight, right? And then we're sending somebody to a closed door. And we want to kind of condense that information period and that push notification period to be on the daily, so that people, when they're hearing the shelter is opening tonight, means that the shelter is opening tonight. So upon posting by Lakewood, once we see on that site the banner at the top says that we are opening in that date, then it's free for all, and it's like certainly be out there engaging your networks, engaging your contact lists to let people know that the shelter will be open. We want people to come inside. So now we got an alarm clock, 0-hour action. So again, we're not stopping on deploying, coordinating, and monitoring actions throughout the course of the event, even as we're activated. This is when county motel vouchers coordinate to the program. We get a lot of questions about motel vouchers and alternate shelter. What I'll say about motel vouchers is motel vouchers and the transportation to motel, we coordinate at random and without preference as we're managing potential overflow needs, but we're also coordinating with intention and discretion to accommodate guests with access or functional needs. So there's kind of these two truths that we got to hold in mind as we're managing how we distribute motel vouchers. Like if we see somebody who's coming up in wheelchair or mobility, has mobility needs and access needs, We definitely want to be able to accommodate them in the best way possible. That may be with a motel voucher, but if we're reaching that capacity where a 75 person demand is turning into a 100-person demand, those allocations for motel vouchers are going to be distributed at random and without preference. So that might be that we're vouchering people who are at the front of the line rather than at the end of the line, because we don't want folks thinking that if they show up late, they have a better chance of the shelter being full and taken to motel. We have to manage for some of those realities to do this in the most equitable way. So as we're activated to stand down, we're continuing to monitor through the course of the activation, looking for that day when the temperature is a bit nicer to be able to stand down. The county motel and alternative shelter resources will remain coordinated through activation. We've already led a 5-day period of activation in which they were coordinated through it. Our operating partner will report their nightly census of people by 10 a.m. So I don't get the information on how many people stayed the night prior until mid-morning of the next day. We update that information to our division, to Lakewood Communications upon request, and to our operating partners at Jefferson County. And then we kind of coordinate our assessment for how long is this going to go. So the city staff and the program staff running it at a 1-night, a 3-night, and 5-night intervals are going to be conferencing on how things are going and how the trajectory of the weather pattern looks and anticipating stand down. It's my experience, once we get into that 5-night period of an ongoing consecutive night activation, that's when we have to start worrying about, the sustainability of the duration of the event. We get into overtime or into call outs of staff. We get into just fatigue of operating that program on the fly. But it's rare. It's rare. I say it's rare, even though we did a 5-night activation a couple of weeks ago. But we'll continue to assess and be in conversation with the program. And then stand down actions. The schedule is conveyed as soon as we know. As soon as we know we're going to pull the shelter offline, we want people aware so that they can make a plan for that day. It's no later than 12 hours prior to a closure. Our deploy and our coordinating activities wrap up. So our navigators are back, removed from that prioritization of helping people navigate their way to shelter. A closure is always going to occur on the morning following the last night of an operation. We're never going to go in and say, oh, it's warm, but it's 3 a.m, right? We're still going to run that night all the way through until the morning release. Operating partners then restore the facility, and the city, we return to that just normal monitoring for the next weather pattern that might arise. So last section here, I'm probably going on a little bit long. I want to give you a picture of what the shelter environment and kind of kit looks like. I describe it as kit for severe weather shelter because we're not working with durable goods here. So this extreme or severe weather sheltering is designed to be modular, to something that you can back into open space, stand up and take down, right? So there's no permanent bed or permanent fixture that we're talking about here. It's all mobilized supply. So what kit involves for activation is a poly mattress with an integrated pillow. And in all transparency, we don't have those yet because FEMA was so active around the hurricanes that suppliers couldn't get the order delivered on time for us. We're anticipating those at the end of the month. And right now we rush ordered rollout camp pads for that 5-day activation. That's what we'll be using tomorrow, but they should be arriving soon, the 3-inch mattresses. People also get polar fleece blankets. We have the area equipped with 3 accessibility or functional need cots that are raised from the ground, where you can tilt the back, tilt the feet up if needed, in case we're in the situation where we cannot accommodate somebody otherwise and they need to be accommodated on site. Additionally, we are using portalette toilets and hand washing stations like you would see at festivals. We've only owned this building for 2 months, and it is not equipped or designed for the assembly use. So we do need to use modular kind of plumbing supplies to get through this type of programming in the space. So the shelter environment, will be maintained in a clean order. Our operators are charged to clean it on the daily and then also return it to better condition once they leave an activation. Guests are permitted access to an outdoor smoking area. We have 2 meals that people will have access to through the course of the program. An evening meal is provided at night, and morning meals provided with continuity to Recovery Works day programming during the work week and incorporated into the severe weather sheltering on weekends when Recovery Works isn't open. The sleeping area has 5 points, 5 emergency exits, and at least the majority of those, once you go out, the door locks behind you. But at least one of those is going to remain accessible for reentry and exit for smokers, for restroom use, animal relief areas, those type of things. Our staff ratio is 1 to 20. This is a minimum of 4 staff for the 75-person bed capacity. It's important to note, though, that we say the program has 75-person sleeping capacity, but we're also, a whole other element of this program is navigating folks to alternative shelter as well. So a couple weeks ago, our crest for this season so far was 126 individuals who were served through the program. 68 of those individuals slept in the shelter, and we always try to keep some of those beds free for when people come in at 3 in the morning. But about higher than 40% of those folks were actually moved to alternative shelter through this program. So that's a very significant part of this that shouldn't go understated. It's not only that we're sleeping people at the navigation center, but we're helping them find indoor places to be when we reach our limit as well. So, and then I'd like to give you more information about the community-based organization that we're going to have doing this. Unfortunately, we are still in active procurement for severe weather shelter operations right now. Bayard Enterprises has been carrying the programmatic responsibility until we reach that point. And then in conclusion, conclusion is the same points. Homelessness is a solvable problem, and housing with services is a solution to homelessness. But I will wrap up the presentation there and open the conversation.
Thank you so much for that and for all the work that you guys have done. Before I hand it over to council for questions, just a massive thank you for the regularity, the communication that has come out of probably, I would say, your office, Mr. Connor, but it's probably literally your computer that you're doing it. This is a new thing for the city of Lakewood to really be going deeper on trying to address some of these issues. And it's not been an easy process. There have been a lot of growing pains, along with that, a lot of trying to get better at things and realizing where things need to be getting better. And I'll tell you, you have done an amazing job with regards to clarifying the communication of what is out there. This year, it's been really refreshing. Every time I get that email from you that this is open, we're like, okay, good. We've got the info we need. We've got it early enough that we can dispel it out to the community members that need it. So I just want to say a huge thank you to all the effort that you've done putting together all that info and making sure that it goes out to everybody, including your city councilors, as early as possible.
Thank you, Mayor. It means a lot to me that once you receive that, you're sharing that too. I do not have a voice that can project that far into the community yet. So thanks for leveraging your networks as well.
Councilor Maya Guerrero.
Want to echo our mayor and just a huge amount of thanks for how the program is already working this year. And also on that just really thorough presentation. I think having sort of every single aspect of how this works and a little bit of the nuances in there, getting a little more granular and how all of the things fit together is tremendously helpful, and I think will help us as a body sort of like understand how to better support that space. But I think also we'll be able to answer a lot of the more detail-oriented questions that we get from community. And I'm very excited about our capacity in this program, and I'm really thrilled that we are leading the county on this response. I do have a couple of questions. One of my first questions is do you feel that that you have like sufficient outreach, right? You were talking about going out with police and homeless navigators, and then we share things. I saw that the county had pushed out things to their heading home network. But do you have enough folks? Do you have enough homeless navigators for that kind of outreach? Do you have enough homeless navigators? Do we have enough homeless navigators for other things as well? I think is my second question there, but particularly for this, like, how successful do we think we are at getting out the word? And like, yeah, is there sufficient capacity being lent there?
Yeah, sure. I've been thinking about that and trying to be a little bit, as data informed as I can on how I'm thinking about that. You can always add another outreach worker. I think there's some components that you have to make sure that you're growing kind of symbiotically with that outreach, right? You want to make sure that as you're growing an outreach program, you're resourcing that outreach worker so as not to dilute what's already out there, right? You want your outreach workers in the field to be well equipped to meet people's needs. I think a big helpful piece has just been having a navigation center in place, right? It's Lakewood's first facility-based component of a homelessness response, right? I mean, and I think it's given the two-person homeless navigator team that I have a really good kind of foothold on where they can tell people to go, right? In terms of like, are we getting the message out? I did go through that initial 5-day activation period. I looked at where we crested in terms of the number of guests that we were bringing in, and that number was 126, right? And they're largely single adults, right? They're not our families experiencing homelessness. They're not necessarily unaccompanied youth or anything. They're single adults. So I did want to I looked at the point in time numbers to kind of cross-reference, like, well, how many single adults in unsheltered homelessness do we have in Jefferson County? So this is in Lakewood, but it's in Jefferson County. So the total point in time count from last year, when we go out once a year to try to identify as many people experiencing homelessness, that total was 925. But if you start slicing that down to only get a number of single adults who are unsheltered, that number goes down to 514. So we got 125 of those folks were somehow outreached or in reach. They knew about the program. They came forward and presented to receive care. So I'm thinking we're about 25% there, 25% of that unsheltered single adult and homelessness count, we're gravitating to the service. So I think we're doing pretty good getting that word out for the very first week that we were operating, in terms of that weather being a push factor, but also people knowing where to go.
Cool, thank you. Thank you so much for all that information. Glad to hear. And you said 126 was the tap out, right? That was the highest number?
That was the crest. So 68 of those individuals did sleep at the navigation center. The rest, by county resources, were navigated to indoors. And that was the night of the big weather push where the snow was stopping streets and the like.
So my other question, I think, is more on that. I know you talked a little bit about transportation, but I think in our last presentation, a year ago-ish, we talked about this need for transportation and also for like other locations, right? One of the wonderful things about the shelter is where it is relatively accessible via transit. It is near where a lot of folks reside, who are unsheltered, but making sure that people like families who show up there or minors are able to get those vouchers and get to places and get back from places, and like vice versa, that folks in Jefferson County are able to find and get to the shelter. I know has been something that it has been difficult in terms of both like funding, but also like figuring out the best, most effective ways to do that. Obviously, the long-term hope is that we have other places with beds open in the county, just to say that out loud. But I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit more about how that went. And then I will leave my other questions and see if we get to them via other counselors.
Yeah, no, and I'll say that again and echo that again too, is that we do need other locations and other beds throughout the county, really. The idea of transporting people to 8,000 West Colfax countywide may not be sustainable. Like if we were operating this program on the nightly, and eventually we do want to get there, right? Where we aren't doing severe weather activations anymore, but we have a reliable shelter that's open every single night, right? But even if we were there and we were operating a shelter at capacity of 75 nightly, and then we had another 46% of demand coming and needing to navigate somewhere through 8,000 West Colfax every night, that probably wouldn't be a tenable situation, right? So we need ways that people can navigate to other navigation centers that are distributed through the county. In terms of transportation right now, we relied on Bayod's driver and van to assist people to motel, and then with a return trip of county provided bus fare to get back, right? So, I mean, we wrapped up transportation when we put out our request for proposals for this year's operator of extreme weather sheltering, severe weather sheltering. It's a component of that, so it's kind of coming in with the package, and the expectation of whoever we bring in to run this is also going to have the idea for how they're coordinating the county resources and how they're getting people to those alternatives once we reach capacity at the NAV Center.
Counselor Sinks.
Thank you. Yes, and thanks for the presentation, Chris. Really appreciate it. It was very astute of us to say, hey, remodeling is not going to start during the winter. We need this as a cold weather shelter. And yet, as we move through the winter, I wonder if there's been a date set for when remodeling will start. Will it be March, April, May, anything set yet?
So while we're in operation for severe weather, we are doing pieces of the longer term project. So we can't go in there and swing a hammer and knock down walls and make a construction site where we're also sleeping people. Things that we can do is bringing in our design architect and thinking about permitting processes and what's needed to ready ourselves once the end of the cold weather season is upon us at the end of April, to be able to go in on May 1st and have all things move out so that construction partner can come in, the builders can come in and start doing that hammer swinging, right, to revision that space. Our ambitious hope is that we get to the cold weather activation season of 2025 and we can ribbon cut this building, this address, as a fully functioning 24/7 navigation center, right? That's the hope and vision, and that removes us out of this kind of structure of the response where we're only activating when we're looking at temperature thresholds or anything, and we're just consistently operating a shelter program for X number of beds in a night-to-night capacity.
Great, thanks. Yeah, you anticipated my other question on having it finished by 2025 cold weather season. So yeah, thank you so much for your great planning in getting ready for permits when you can swing hammers, etc. So appreciate your work. Thank you.
I do want to say that that is a breakneck schedule. All green lights, all things moving as fast as they can, but that's what that's our goal. That's our stake in the ground. So
thanks.
Councilor Cruz.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Connor. Just wanted to echo my colleagues' gratitude for, the amount of care put into this presentation and the information you're sharing with us, as well as all of the work you and your team and all of our partners are putting in to make this possible. I mean, I think that the data, at least that we have so far, speak for themselves and the kind of impact that this can have. And I look forward to learning more about that as we have more data and more access to it. And so I appreciate your data-driven approach. And just wanted to echo some of the feedback on Lakewood Speaks and my own thoughts that the expanded capacity with the greater amount of space is also great to hear. And also it seems like we have greater demand, even at just our Lakewood site, than that capacity has. That thankfully it seems like the vouchering program is covering. So that's awesome. So I have just a couple, some larger picture questions, but some just very curious questions about the operations. So what happens when there's the turnover from the night to the day services for Bayard, or for between Bayard now, whomever is going to be there later, to Recovery Works?
So currently in the mornings, it's not lockstep, where there is about a 40-minute to an hour period when people are released from the overnight sheltering component so that they can kind of clean that area, and people tend to stage for opening of Recovery Works. I feel comfortable saying that through our solicitation process right now, we're seeing some creative ideas about how do we wed those two together so that there isn't a gap in that service and people can just move directly from the night of shelter and walk through the door to the day program. It does mention, though, the day services at Recovery Works, they tend to wrap up at around 2 p.m. 5 days a week, and then there's a gap there as well that's a bit longer, where people wait for the shelter to open at 7 p.m. Right? So there is space in the day between the closure of day services and the opening of an activation at night as well.
Thank you. Yeah, no, that's helpful to kind of understand, and excited that maybe there will be some improvements with that with the new, with whatever provider kind of ends up coming through the procurement process. I also was just curious kind of what the meal has looked like, and also what that's going to look like based on the procurement process.
Yeah, I was at the shelter several times for that 5-day period. I didn't sit down for a meal with folks because I was a bit busy at that time. But what I saw was, for the evening meal was good. I have an eye on for that too. So I saw brisket sandwiches the first night from a restaurant vendor, and then other things moving on through the week as well. So the morning meal, sometimes it has been grab and go. It's grab and go typically when the day services at Recovery Works are going to provide a hot breakfast upon opening in the morning. So that morning meal for the activated severe weather portion isn't as substantial, because the presumption is that people would prefer to get a hot meal anyway once they're in Recovery Works. Recovery Works is not open on the weekends, so they're not providing that breakfast meal on the weekends. And then that's when the severe weather program would kind of amp up their morning offerings for a breakfast meal.
Yeah, so that's awesome to hear. And maybe I'll just ask one more of my questions, and then I'll defer and get in the back of the line for our timing. So I think maybe just another logistical question. I'm curious, I think maybe a statement as well. I'm really grateful for the expansion of the temperature threshold. I mean, within kind of what had already been set up, and I'm glad that we're holding to that. And I think that that's really helpful. I know we're the only people in the county doing that. And the county, I think, right, is having their plan to activate at 0 degrees. And so I'm curious, like, what coordination would look like for that in a kind of a very extreme case.
Yeah, that's a good question. I think, one of the blessings of the 5-day activation, you tend to want like a slower rollout to kind of dip your toe in the water, but we were kind of thrown into it, right? We had 5 days of activated shelter, and the last day of that was a snowstorm that was coming in that was anticipated to close our interstates and close our highways and such. And so that it allowed me to kind of see kind of like, okay, when we have a severe winter weather storm push factor, like you do get more people the worse the weather gets, right? So I'm not anticipating tomorrow night on Tuesday, the low is going to be 20 degrees, but very little precipitation. We're still going to open. It's not going to be that 126 person crest. Or if it is, it's not necessarily a weather push factor. It's that there's a demand for that shelter so that when people know that it's open, they're going to show up for it, right? We have yet to see kind of the coordination with the county's plans as they're thinking about mobile shelters and such. But coordination of motel vouchers, and so far up until now, we've been pretty arm in arm with that. I've been pretty frank with the county. Like, I don't want to open the navigation center if I don't also have a vouchering resource or something that helps me manage when we meet that person 76 or we're going up to 80 people or something. I don't want my program to be in the position of telling people that we're full and turning them away, right? We need to have another option for them. And so far, we've been pretty arm in arm with the county showing up with those resources. I think if it does become an issue, it may become an issue as a resource issue for the county that we need to work in.
Mayor Pro Tem Sharazai.
Yes, thank you. Yeah, lots of gratitude. We've come a long way over these last few years, and just really appreciate all the work that went into building a policy that's really responsive to what we're hearing from stakeholders, and that this level of detail tonight that you were able to share. So a lot of gratitude there. I wanted to build a little bit on what Councilor Mayotte Guerrero and Councilor Cruz were talking about. Just more explicitly, we do know that there was another Jefferson County community that was going to open a navigation center, and it looks like they've changed course on that parcel of land. And so we hope that the county continues to walk arm in arm with us in this work, but is there a consideration that's being discussed around possible reallocation of those dollars to potentially support the work that we're doing in Lakewood, because we are up and running? And we know that the other municipality is not going to be moving that work forward.
We haven't had a perfectly transparent conversation with other municipalities on resource questions. Our conversations really have been about the programmatic coordination and how to make sure what we're doing is accessible and utilized, and that we're resourced when we hit that high water mark of what our capacity can hold. We've neither sent an ask out to other municipalities for additional resources or anything. I think, though, right now our limitation is going to be the facility, right? So it's going to be that we don't want to go over a 75-person capacity, right? And so I think to consider this. Consider the pressures that we're going to have through the year with the moved weather criteria. Like, my estimates when I looked at the last 3 years of how many nights would fit the new weather criteria, it ranged between 50 and 70 nights in a year. That's a lot more nights than we were doing last year. And I do have some concern that, if we don't have some decompression resource, whether that's a county-based resource or whether that's another navigation center that's opening in another municipality, like a gym floor can get us pretty far if it's found somewhere in the county, right? Without those resources, we'll be in a really hard spot if we have a March, April weather pattern that looks a lot like November 8th, that last day of this last activation. So heavy wet snows measured in several inches or feet that bring those 126 people to our door. 46% of those people did not stay at our navigation center. We had to find something else for them. So my hope is that other municipalities and the county can continue to explore what that something else is and get activated around that before we see those conditions in the springtime side of a severe weather season.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Yep.
Counselor Lowe.
Thanks. I will echo what all the other counselors have said. Mr. Connor, I'm really grateful that we have you on board, and I mean, I think this is incredibly important and necessary work, and we're grateful you're leading it. And it's just very clear to me, even looking at all of the preparation that's been done for this season versus last season, or last winter, that there's been some really important progress. Thank you for framing your presentation around the hypothermia issue and the emergency room visits. I think that's a really important metric. And in fact, can I ask that on at least an annual basis, we continue to get sort of backward-looking statistics on hypothermia deaths in Jefferson County, if that's something we can continue to look at? Because I think that's a very sobering but meaningful statistic for us to be looking at, and hopefully we can continue to have that number be 0 or as close to it as possible. So if we could maybe have the city continue to get us that at least annually to assess whether this is continuing to save lives, I think that would be great.
Yeah, and those charts and data are gratitude to Jefferson Public Health, Department of Public Health, for helping us get that. And they're building their sophistication around that correlation too. They also want to know more, so we're arm in arm and thought partners on that, and much gratitude to them for helping us create that lens into why we're doing this work.
Thank you for speaking also to sort of how the communications aspect of this works. I totally agree that the need for that to be sort of well coordinated and streamlined. I've appreciated that we've been getting those. I think it clearly seems to be a part of the operating procedure that council is getting those updates by email, and I find that very helpful. So thank you for doing that. I guess, I mean, I know a number of us are already doing that, but I would encourage us to continue to share those little infographics on social media, so that we can do our bit to help get the word out every time the cold weather shelter is open. So thank you for continuing to do that. One quick thought that relates back to Councilor Cruz's question on food. My understanding is, that the question of providing evening meals is, properly is with Recovery Works and Bad Enterprises. I know that, last winter, a number of local restaurants pitched in and donated food. Without putting this on sort of on the city to coordinate, I just wonder, as we continue to sort of fine tune the communications on this, is there a way that as cold weather gets open, there could be an efficient channel for Lakewood restaurants that do want to contribute a meal to just sort of get